Welcome to the 3 Down Nation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by a getting better John Hodge. Doesn't sound quite as raspy. This week, JC Abbott is off. But Hodge, man, you back to 100%. You going to be ready for the season? Full go, baby?
I better be. I certainly sound better now than I did last week. I wouldn't say I'm 100%, but I'm hoping that snow will be in the forecast and the snowflake will be back to full 100% next week. Because cheese is on the menu for next week. So I got to be back to 100% for next week.
That's the only kind of snow I want to hear talked about until next winter, okay? Snowflakes in the sense of the term, how it's meant to be described. What Boomer Esiason called you, essentially, no more snow for the rest of the year. Today we're discussing Shawn Lemon filing an appeal against his gambling suspension.
Longtime CFL defensive tackle Ted Laurent retiring.
Bo Levi Mitchell returning to practice without a walking boot on and actually participating.
The Elks reporting a financial loss for the 5th straight year.
And the Alouettes unveiling the bling. But first,
Toronto Argonauts general manager Mike Pinball Clemons spoke to the media last Thursday in what was his first availability since franchise quarterback Chad Kelly was suspended for a minimum of 9 games after the CFL's investigation determined he violated the league's gender-based violence policy. Clemons defended Toronto's decision to allow Kelly on the field during rookie camp, stating it didn't violate league rules, though the team has since removed Kelly from training camp and added him to the suspended list. The decision came after 2 prominent league employees, CFL Senior Manager of Web and Digital Content Christina Constable and Blue Bombers Senior Director of Branding Rayan Marcoux, spoke out about Kelly's participation at rookie camp. TSN panelist and ex-CFL General Manager Jim Barker, who worked for the Argonauts in 2022 when Kelly was first signed, told the Rod Peterson show those comments should be fined by the league. Though the league's 87-page investigative report remains private, an executive summary of the document has been reported. It corroborated 3 of 6 claims listed by Toronto's former strength and conditioning coach in her lawsuit, including persistent romantic advances, acts of aggression during a team breakfast on November 6th, and derogatory remarks that were made later that day. Investigators were unable to validate the claim that Kelly uttered threats, as the player who heard the alleged comment refused to participate in the investigation. Kelly has denied making threatening remarks, and none of the allegations against him have been tested in court. Dunk, this is the longest lead-in in 3 Down Nation pod history, but we felt compelled to include all of the details here. What do you make of the latest developments with Kelly and the Argonauts?
The Argonauts have completely fumbled this entire situation by letting Kelly on the field. I don't care if it didn't violate league rules. Michael Pinball Clemons, John Murphy, anybody in that front office, MLSE media relations people, Ryan Dinwiddie, the head coach, should have read the room and understood the temperature and what it said about having Kelly on the field at rookie camp and not had him there. Now the team has since removed him from training camp, put him on the team's suspended list. I think that's an important distinction for multiple reasons that we'll get into, but it's a little bit too little too late because it shows that the Argos were in a lot of ways tone deaf here. And I think that is the major next part of this story to me is, yes, Kelly has been suspended for a minimum of 9 games, but will there actually be any meaningful discipline for the, I guess, higher-ups, for lack of a better term, within the Argonauts organization? Because I think that is something that needs to be said. It's one thing to talk about a potential appeal from Kelly and how this will play out from his perspective, but it's clear from the lawsuit, it's documented on both sides. John Murphy's name was in there, and there were other members of the Argonauts front office staff and team as a whole that knew that there were some of these alleged incidents that had taken place. So why was this not addressed sooner? And it goes back to that question, Hodge. I've said it multiple times on the podcast, and I'll keep saying it. If the plaintiff had not filed this lawsuit, would any of this have ever come to light?
I fully agree with you, Dunk. It was wild watching. And by the way, I want to credit you and the other reporters who were at Pinball Scrum. I thought he was asked excellent questions. I know that Pinball took issue with one of them from TSN's Matthew Shinetti, which he said was unfair. Personally, I thought it was a perfectly fair question. Essentially, Pinball was asked, how disappointed are you with the situation? Well, Pinball, if you're not disappointed with the situation, I don't know what to tell you. It was a fair question. Pinball should be disappointed in his organization. He should be disappointed in himself, and he should be disappointed in, obviously, his franchise quarterback, right? These have been corroborated, a number of these claims. Now, again, they've not been tested in court, but with text messages, eyewitness accounts, there is now officially fuel to this fire, right? This is no longer smoke. This is actual flames, and the Argonauts need a fire extinguisher to put this thing out, not keep adding fuel to the fire. And unfortunately, I think that's honestly what Pinball did in his availability. I did not think was particularly well spoken. He did not seem particularly well prepared. He tried to talk out of both sides of his mouth at certain times. At one point, you know, he said, well, if anybody's done anything wrong, it's me, and I'll take all the blame. But then when asked, what are you going to do to get better? He essentially refused to answer the question. So to me, it is unreasonable to say, I'm at fault, blame me for everything, but then also not offer any concrete examples of maybe what you did wrong and what you could do better. Because to me, then at that point, you're just falling on the sword for the people around you. Do you deserve some credit for that? I don't know, maybe. But the most important thing here is not assigning blame. The most important thing here is getting this right so that it doesn't happen again. And I don't see at all any evidence that the Argonauts have said, and this is what we are going to do better to ensure that this won't happen again. The only thing that Pinball said as part of that availability was, well, the CFL told us that we need to do a better job of keeping notes. So it's like, okay, so you're going to document things more. Okay, that's fair. But what about the greater problem here, the greater issue, which is the fact that you seem to have no idea what's going on in your own building? And we've talked about this on the show. Pinball is not really the general manager for most, intents and purposes or definition of that term. If anything, I'd say he's maybe more of a president. John Murphy is for all intents and purposes the general manager. But this is obviously an inexcusable thing to have happen. And I want to, first of all, condemn the Argonauts player who did not comply with this investigation. I think it is gutless and sad to be asked questions about a situation that took on in your workplace and not be willing to answer those questions. And secondly, I want to applaud Christina Constable and I want to applaud Rayanne Marcoux, who put themselves on the line publicly by issuing statements here as women who work in the CFL. It takes guts to do that, to put yourself out there. I'm sure they received a ton of nasty messages back from those social media posts from people who disagree with them or want to defend Chad Kelly or the Argonauts, and they put themselves through getting those responses because clearly they felt strongly about speaking out. So I want to give them props for doing so.
Full credit to both of them from me as well. It takes courage and strength to speak out as current league employees for both of those women in Christina and Rianne. And I think that Michael Pinball Clemons on down to the rest of us and a lot of the Toronto Argonauts should listen to their perspectives because we could learn a lot. We can't speak to what it's like to be a female in a CFL workplace, so we need to listen and learn. I thought Pinball Clemons should have noted that instead of listing off some of the female employees that have been with the Argos for a long time that have been treated well. It's like, that's not what we're talking about here.
That was cringeworthy.
It was awful. And I had to cut in at one point because to me, and this is just my own opinion, it felt like Pinball Clemons was kind of making Kelly out to be the victim. I said, we're talking a lot about Chad Kelly here, but we haven't talked about the alleged victim or the plaintiff in this case, what her experiences were. And then you talked about Pinball Clemons speaking out both sides of his mouth. He talked about and praised the Argonauts culture. I just can't understand how in a media availability, you would praise your culture when your culture is under fire here. And yes, from their perspective, or I guess Pinball's perspective, you might say it's only one example. And some of the quotes he had around that were just, unbelievable. I can't believe Pinball said it. But let's look at the situation as a whole here and understand why people are so upset. Understand why there are diehard female CFL fans, potential season ticket holders that are willing to give up their tickets, women that are out there online that are saying, I'm never going to buy a ticket to another Argos game again until Chad Kelly is no longer a part of the organization. Those are the people that you need to go out and listen and learn from, not just doing one simple thing that the league told you about, documenting what goes on in your building. That's clearly laid out in the league's gender-based violence policy, Hodge. So I think when we talk about the Argonauts and potential discipline for the franchise, that needs to be noted here, that the Argonauts did not follow the policy themselves to the letter of, in this case, the law from the CFL's perspective. So does that not make them as a team susceptible to discipline for violating that policy? I believe it does. I think we're focused on Chad Kelly throughout much of the story, and rightfully so, based on the alleged incidents. But the CFL has found him, for all intents and purposes, guilty and rendered their discipline. Where is the discipline for the franchise? And to be quite honest, I will give Pinball Clemons credit for this, standing up and taking blame. But I don't think he should have been the one speaking there. I think it should have been the president of the organization and Bill Manning, because ultimately he is the one that is at the top. Or if it's not going to be him, it needs to be Keith Pelly. So credit for Clemons to coming out there and actually fielding questions, because when I showed up to the opening of main training camp on Sunday, I was told that Ryan Dinwiddie would only be fielding questions about players who were on the field. Now, I apologize to our readers, listeners, and viewers. I should have pushed and at least explained the side where people out there are still asking these questions and the fans deserve answers. I will be better for that in the future. But I think that this organization needs to undergo, behind the scenes, somewhat of a complete overhaul with how they have handled this situation. And I sure hope that it does not happen again in the future.
Well, something that I thought, and yeah, I agree that Pinball deserves some credit. He could have just hidden in his office, but some of the things that he said were so cringeworthy. Something that really bothered me is at one point, I believe he was asked about the suspension in of itself, and he said, I'm not here to agree or disagree with the league's discipline. But then later on in the same availability, he called it a very harsh punishment. So are you here to pass judgment about the suspension, or are you not? Like he seemed to answer a question and then completely undercut the thing that he just said and talk out of both sides of his mouth. And he did that repeatedly. And yes, PR 101, when you are being actively sued and there are credible allegations of sexual harassment in your building, please don't talk about how your building has tremendous culture, and don't talk about, well, but this woman likes working here and that woman because for the reasons you mentioned, Dunk, we don't know what the women experience in your building, because if it weren't for this lawsuit, we wouldn't know that this individual had been the subject of any alleged serious claims. So don't speak for the women in your organization. I thought that kudos to him. Winnipeg Blue Bombers head coach Mike O'Shea had excellent leadership in this regard. He said, well, I'd like to think that the women in our organization have a good experience here, but you should ask them, because women can speak for themselves. Don't stand up there and list all the women in your building and then speak on their behalf and say, well, they like working here or they like our culture. That is their job. They can answer those questions. It was not a good availability. I think if anything, it hurt more than helped. And hopefully, if nothing else, this can, in the long term, as you said, Dunk, help this organization turn over a new leaf, get this culture fixed. Because right now, this team has completely wasted all the goodwill that their 16-2 season garnered last year, and I think and then some. Like this organization, it's like the definition of one step forward, two steps back. Like all of the progress they made off the field in 2023, I think has been squandered and then some for 2024. This organization has taken steps back and they need to rebuild it properly this time because obviously their success last season came at a cost.
There needs to be there needs to be discipline for the people who erred in the front office here. And I'm not going to stop with that because I don't think it's fair that Chad Kelly bears the brunt of this. And I'm not talking about, taking away draft picks or salary cap money or anything like that. We're talking about a league where players routinely get fined for uniform violations, not having their socks high enough. Like, what are we talking about here? We can't fine some people in the front office for less than stellar or less than up to par conduct. I think that should be the baseline here. And I really want to call on Randy Ambrosie in the league office to investigate those people in the front office and see if there is merit to that. You did a 3-month-long investigation, 87-page report into the allegations levied against Chad Kelly. But what about the others in the organization that failed in this instance? Or could have allegedly failed, I should say. I hope that is done and that those people in the front office who might have had anything to do with dropping the ball with this are held to that same standard that Chad Kelly is being held to.
Couldn't agree more.
Shawn Lemon returned to the Montreal Alouettes on Tuesday after appealing his indefinite suspension for gambling on CFL games in 2021, while playing for the Calgary Stampeders included one game in which he played. CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie expressed his displeasure with the union for filing a grievance, stating, quote, "The CFL is disappointed that the Players Association would challenge a decision so fundamental to the integrity of our league. The league's rules prohibiting CFL-related gambling in 2021 were made abundantly clear to all players at the time, yet Mr. Lemon knowingly ignored those rules. The prohibition of wagering on the CFL by CFL personnel, including players, is critical to the reputation and standing of the league. The CFL will vigorously defend its position at the arbitration hearing." Close quote. Hodge, what do you make of Lemon's decision to appeal?
I honestly agree with Randy Ambrosie here. I think it's disappointing. I appreciate that Lemon wants to keep playing. Obviously, all football players want to keep playing, and Lemon is coming off a great year. Right? He won a Grey Cup. He got a nice contract. He was very productive and I think found a team where he can really have a long-term home, which is something that he hasn't had for most of his career. So I get this desire to appeal, but something that we've not heard from Lemon through this whole thing, which is now almost a month old, is any type of admission that he made a mistake. And to me, that is bothersome. I appreciate he might not want to hurt himself when it comes to a potential appeal. But to me, some admission of, hey, yes, it's true that I bet on a game in 2021, and that was a huge mistake. And I did not bet on games during 2022 and 2023. And I promise that I will be a better person moving forward. That type of statement would, I think, go maybe not a super long way to earning the trust of fans in the CFL back, to earning the trust of his teammates back, to earning the trust of his coaches and personnel staff back, but it would be something, right? What we do know is that Shawn Lemon retired with the hope of this never coming out. And to me, that is not courage. That is cowardice. That is running away from something that you did to try to get away without being disciplined. And now, fair question. Should a player who bet on a game be banned for life? I'm not sure the answer is yes. We've seen a number of NFL players, for instance, bet on games and then get to play again. And I do think that maybe it's a bit of a flaw in the CFL that there's no concrete rules for who should come back. And that is why I imagine the CFLPA has agreed to file an appeal on his behalf. But to me, the fact that Lemon, at least to this point, has taken zero responsibility and in fact tried to run from this problem, frankly, I find distasteful, and I am not excited about the prospect of him getting back on the field this way. To me, a much better way to get back on the field to say, hey, I want to win the trust and the respect back of the CFL community. I'm going to come out. I'm going to admit what I did. And I want to request a private meeting with Randy Ambrosie during which we can discuss this situation. And instead of setting a precedent of, oh, hey guys, we can all bet on our games and still play in this league, we can set a precedent of, hey, look, I was the first one to make this mistake and get caught. I want to be the last one, and I want to help the rest of my players not fall into the same trap that I did. That's what I want to see. We have not seen that, and it's disappointing.
I would imagine, Hodge, to be honest, and we've both been around Shawn Lemon for a long time in his career, that a lot of that kind of stuff would come out after the arbitration process, because you got to be very careful about what you say, which is, I think, something that the Toronto Argonauts could have learned from and going about it a different way with the Chad Kelly situation. But in this instance with Lemon, I think he's taking the silent approach, which for what's going to go on behind the scenes is probably the smart one. I do think that this is very intriguing in terms of the appeal process, because you look at what Kelly could potentially do, and he could appeal his suspension if the Argonauts don't suspend him and be back on the field. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. It's pure speculation, but Lemon can get back on the field here. And, you know, at least with him, it was only one bet for 70 euros, around $100 Canadian. I'm not condoning it in any way, but you look at some of the suspensions and discipline that has been handed down in the NFL, and we're talking about multiple bets for, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. You look at the example with Jonte Porter, who was with the Toronto Raptors, and that was thousands of dollars that was being bet there, and he got a lifetime ban. So I think this is a little bit different, but I also do think that the CFL was late to this. We're talking about, you know, almost 3 years later, where they've actually caught the individual. And what does that say about their process? And you mentioned it in terms of the discipline. It's not clearly laid out. And part of the reason this appeal is going forward is because Lemon and the PA can appeal and say, well, there weren't gambling courses at that time that specifically laid out what you could and couldn't do. And some people, and Mike O'Shea, full credit to him for calling a spade, will say, well, you should know the rules, and as a professional, you shouldn't bet. But I think that part of this is on the CFL here, and this is what the PA is going to argue, that they did not educate the players enough. And why did it take so long? And then you look at the appeal process, and from the PA's perspective, you know, there's a lot of appeals and grievances that don't even get reported on or ever get to the public eye, but that are in the Rolodex or the queue or whatever you want to say. And the PA is going to say, well, why don't we deal with these first? Why don't we deal with a bunch of these players who have had, you know, lingering, long-lasting injuries long after their CFL careers have ended? Why don't we deal with everything that's in the Rolodex before we get to the Shawn Lemon gambling suspension? I understand that it's likely more pertinent in the eyes of the CFL with all of the gambling partnerships that the league has. But still, those are, I think, some valid arguments from the PA's perspective, and we'll see how this plays out. The difficulty with it is there has not been a precedent set for both sides. So that will make the ruling from the arbitrator one that puts a flagpole in the ground for both sides.
Something that I find regrettable about the discourse surrounding the Shawn Lemon situation is everybody talking about the prevalence of sports betting, almost like it's an excuse for Lemon or for any player who's caught betting, where it's like, well, how can you possibly avoid betting on games? Like, after all, it's everywhere. I'm sorry. That is a laughable joke. It's a joke. If a surgeon shows up to surgery and messes something up because they are drunk, nobody should say, well, you know, Dr. So-and-so, yeah, you know, they probably shouldn't have been drunk on the job. But you know what? It's those darn alcohol commercials that are on TV all the time. How could they not drink? We don't say that, right? If a lawyer shows up to court stoned, we don't go, oh, well, you know, weed is legal now, and there's a pot shop on every street corner. How could they avoid showing up to their job high? No, we say, wow, what a remarkably unprofessional thing to do. That person should be disciplined for showing up intoxicated to their workplace. And maybe, substance abuse and gambling shouldn't be mentioned in the same breath, but they are similar in a lot of ways, right? They're both potentially addictive, which I do think is a fair comparison. And yes, it is true that gambling is now more prevalent than ever before. But guess what? The CFL's policy allows you to bet on anything that is not the CFL. There is a very, very, very limited scope of what you're not allowed to bet on. And it's true that the league's policy did change in 2022, which is, of course, after Lemon placed this one or multiple bets. But it's always been in the CFL's constitution that this is not allowed. And for the second time today, you mentioned it, Dunk, I think it's worthy of reading the quote from Mike O'Shea, who I think, again, provided tremendous leadership here, said, guess what? Quote, the majority of society doesn't need education on rules to follow the rules. I think that holds true in a lot of different areas, not just sports betting. Close quote. And yes, I appreciate Lemon doesn't want to hurt himself in his appeal, Dunk, but something else has been missing. If Lemon is not going to come out and say, hey, I did this and admit it, then he should be doing the opposite and say, I didn't place these bets and the CFL messed up. Has that happened? No, he has not denied a single thing. And to me, if you're not denying it, let's remember Chad Kelly came out almost immediately on his Twitter feed and denied these allegations. He denied the allegations against him in his statement of defense. Shawn Lemon hasn't denied anything. And to me, that speaks volumes. Because if this was not true, or the CFL had messed up, or the CFL had got it wrong, or the CFL had blamed the wrong person, I feel like Shawn would have come out and said no. So again, I do think that some good can come out of this. I do think that there should be more clarity for players. If someone is caught, is it a 2-game ban? Is it a 4-game ban? Is it a 9-game ban? Is it a lifetime ban? I don't know the answer to that. That's for the league to follow up on. But I do think that it is regrettable that we've got someone who has not openly admitted, but tacitly admitted to betting on games, and they are now potentially going to be able to play week 1. That, I think, is a shame. Bo Levi Mitchell is currently participating in practice with the Hamilton Tiger Cats after wearing a walking boot during rookie camp and day 1 of training camp. Mitchell called it a setback he sustained in a training session 3 weeks ago, and head coach Scott Milanovich confirmed that it was related to the fractured leg he sustained last season. The two-time MOP plans to ramp up his practice reps over the coming weeks and plans to be ready to start week 1 against the Calgary Stampeders. Dunk, do you believe Bo?
To be honest, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but until I see it, I'm not going to believe it. And I understand from the athlete perspective, he's going to come with some confidence and say that he's going to be ready for sure. But Hodge, I watched him practice on, what day was that? Monday. And he didn't take a single rep in team period, 12 on 12 for the uninitiated with the ones or any other group that was out there. It was Taylor Powell getting all the reps in that team period. And some people out there talk about training camp being long. Bro, training camp is short.
Yeah.
It is really short. There's not much time for, rookies to make an impression, but also veterans to get back in the swing of things because those reps are so limited, right? Just by the CBA, you're only allowed to be on the field for so long. You can only have so many padded practices. And it seems like to me, now it's just a few, handful of days of practices now, but that Taylor Powell is trending towards starting the season. And that's just based off the reps. Would it be great to have Bo start the season against the Calgary Stampeders? Yes. But I'm just going based off what I saw on the field. So can Bo be healthy and ready for week 1? Yes, absolutely. That's a possibility. But when I posed this same question to Scott Milanovich, he did not answer it as confidently as Bo Levi Mitchell did. Bo Levi Mitchell said absolutely, one word, and that was it, and he essentially moved on. Scott Milanovich, said that he will see how he progresses and feels, and he does believe that Bo Levi Mitchell can start in week 1, but he wasn't going to kind of guarantee it the way that Bo Levi Mitchell did. So I would like to see it. I think it would be a great storyline, especially because it's that game against the Stampeders. But from what I saw, Howell at the moment, and maybe that's partly because Bo Levi Mitchell was in a walking boot, but is QB1 for the Ticats.
I want to give Scott Milanovic credit for actually talking about this injury. I've sung Mike O'Shea's praises twice now, and I will now balance that by saying this is an answer that you would never get, Winnipeg. If you asked about the status of Zach Collaros, Mike O'Shea would grimace and then glare and then just lie. Or if not lie.
Even if it was obvious.
Even if it was
Mitchell
obvious.
had tape on his calf area.
Correct.
So Milanovic knows, we're not all stupid. I wonder what O'Shea would have said to that.
Oh, he would have said, he would have said anything but the truth. He would have said that Bo Levi Mitchell is an alien from outer space, or he would have said that Bo Levi Mitchell, he would have said literally anything except for answering the question about the injury. So I appreciated that from Scott Milanovic. It was a breath of fresh air. Yeah, it was obvious, but it's also nice to get confirmation. That is our job, is to ask the questions and get confirmation for the people. And the people want to know about the status of Bo Levi Mitchell. The people in Hamilton want to know, and people across the country want to know. I will echo your statements here, Dunk. 2019, Bo Levi Mitchell came out, had a terrible game in the West semifinal, and he'd fully deserved the benefit of the doubt because he had won MOP just the year prior and was considered a first ballot Hall of Famer, which he probably still is. 2021, gets banged up. Jake Maier goes out there as a rookie, looks better than Bo, arguably. But Bo still deserves the benefit of the doubt because Bo is Bo. And Bo is, he's the guy. 2022, Bo struggles, gets hurt again. Jake Maier wins the starting job. And then 2023, Bo goes to Hamilton, only plays 6 games, only wins 2 of them, is out for 12, and then is a backup in the playoffs and finishes the year openly wondering whether he'll even be back in Hamilton, saying he didn't see himself being back in Steeltown. Now, he did stay in Steeltown, but it was on a contract that paid him about half of what he made a year ago. And it's gotten to the point where the benefit of the doubt, not only do I think Bo doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt, it's almost flipped. Like, Bo has to actively prove, I will be openly doubtful of Bo until he can prove that he can be Bo again. And I'm not saying that oh, and I hope Bo. No, the best thing for the CFL would be for Bo to have what general manager Ed Hervey said he expects from Bo, which is an Anthony Calvillo-like renaissance. That would be the best thing for the CFL. That would be the best thing for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. That would be the best story, right? Bo Levi Mitchell in the 11th hour of his career, right? He's on the back nine. He's tearing it up. He's a legit MOP, nominee out of the East. That would be amazing. But I do not feel confident that that is a realistic storyline for this year. And I hope he proves me wrong, but I am highly skeptical of the health and status of Bo Levi Mitchell, what he is at this portion of his career. And again, I hope he proves me wrong, but I am a doubter at this point.
Based, Hodge, on what I've relayed to you and what you read and what you saw from the avails with Bo and Scott Milanovic, do you think he'll be ready to play week 1, or what would you give that percentage chance?
Well, I also hesitate to say ready, because what does ready mean? Does ready mean you can physically get on the field, or does it mean you're on the field with no limitation? I think he could start, but something that really stood out to me when you asked him the question, and I watched it back on the video you posted to our YouTube page, is you asked him about being 100%, and he basically started laughing and was like, well, 100% at age 34. Like that to me, and I don't think this is uncommon for veteran CFL players or professional football players anywhere, but to me, that is not just a tacit omission. That is a full acknowledgement of the fact that he is not 100% and will literally never be back to 100% ever again. And if you strapped guys like Zach Collaros to a lie detector test, right? And you ask them questions about how they're feeling, or you did the same thing with other veterans like McLeod Bethel Thompson, or guys like Christian Matt, who have played over 10 years along the offensive line, and you ask them questions, yeah, they would probably say the same thing. Yeah, I'm not 100%. My body can't do X anymore. When I do Y, it hurts, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think that Bo is the only person in this boat, but it did stand out to me the extent to which he almost found it funny that somebody was asking him, "Are you 100%?" Because to me that means, first of all, the answer is no. I'm not close to 100%, but also I know I'll never be 100%. I might not even get close to 100% again. Like, we are seeing a diminished Bo, and obviously last year the Ticats felt that was not good enough to get him into a playoff game until they'd already lost. I'm curious what that means for 2024. Again, my fingers are crossed. I want to see MOP Bo. I do. I just don't think we're seeing it anymore.
Some other things here I think that are worth noting. You mentioned the playoff game where he didn't start, and Bo Levi talked about him and Scott Milanovic having a very direct conversation about that to get over it and get to the point where he restructured his contract from around $500,000 to around $250,000 for the 2024 season, and him being back with the Ticats. And I had someone, Hodge, ask me in the league, what was your sense and feel being around Bo Levi Mitchell in person and the way he talked compared to when you were around him here and there with the Calgary Stampeders? I thought that was a great question, because I started to reflect and I started to think, when Bo Levi Mitchell was at his best, with all due respect, he was a cocky ass quarterback. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's how Bo Levi Mitchell was great in this league. And for, the majority of that time, it was about Bo. And I think you kind of have to be like that in some form or fashion to be as good as he was running the top team in the West, with John Hufnagel and Dave Dickinson and the rest of the core that was there in Calgary. But he was the dude, right? Calgary was always competing either to win the Grey Cup or at least to be in it and winning the West for, it felt like, a decade there, his time in Calgary. And I got the sense, being around Bo Levi Mitchell on Monday at training camp, the way especially that he was talking about Taylor Powell, he said, and this is almost a direct quote if I remember right, that Powell is going to be an amazing quarterback in this league for a very long time. Do we ever hear him say that about Jake Maier or anybody else that he was competing against in Calgary? Heck no. It was about Bo, and rightfully so. He should be focused on himself. But he's out here talking about, as you alluded to, Hodge, probably never going to get back to 100% himself, and also teaching and guiding Powell on a path to being what he feels like could be a long time and amazing starter in the CFL. That to me has shown the change and the evolution in Bo, and full respect to him for realizing where he's at in his career. I know the competitor in him still wants to be out there, be quarterback one, be making those gun-slinging throws that we're used to seeing from Bo Levi Mitchell, 2018 and before. But we haven't seen those, since 2018, to be quite honest, and a lot of that. And I feel bad for that unfortunate shoulder injury that happened in 2019 that I don't think he's been able to fully recover from. And then it's been injury and recovery and trying to bounce back almost every season since that. So that's what I noticed the most, was a big change in Bo. Now, part of that could be Bo Levi Mitchell sitting there knowing that, he's got a solid contract for this season with hard money in there, and that whenever he steps away from the field, he's going to be able to walk into a media job. Most likely with TSN, he's done multiple Grey Cup coverage with them right after the Tiger Cats season, especially ended last year. He was doing the same thing in his last year when he was at the Calgary Stampeders, that, he's at a different point in perspective. So full credit to him for evolving as a man and a veteran in this league. But it showed me that this Bo Levi Mitchell that we're talking about and watching and hoping is on the field in week one for the sake of the league and because he attracts eyeballs, we know that at 3 Down Nation, is a much different one than we've seen in the past.
Well, and he's great on the paddle. I'm looking forward to seeing him on TSN once he's done playing. But are we going to see the Bo of old? I'm not sure.
Man, that's an open question. I think he's got to prove it. As to what you said, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer in my books. He's had a great career. He has been the face of this league for a long time, but he has to go out and prove if he can even get close to being the kind of quarterback that he was, I'll say, pre-2019. The other story of note here with the Tiger Cats, Hodge, is with all this going on at the quarterback position and Powell taking all of the QB1 reps until Bo Levi Mitchell gets back to some sort of health where he can do that. is the Tiger Cats go out and sign Powell to a 1-year contract extension through the 2025 season, give him a pay bump in 2024. He'll earn $92,000 in hard money this year. And this is the key for me. An additional $2,000 per game in playtime incentives, and that's if he plays 51 or more % of the snaps, he can make up to 2,000 times 18, 36,000 this year, plus 1,500 each for leading the team in passing yards and touchdown passes, along with, and this is pretty usual in CFL contracts, $5,000 available in All-Star and award bonuses. So Powell gets a bit of a raise in 2024, and that playtime shows me that him and his camp potentially felt, hey, if Bo Levi Mitchell's not going to be ready to start the season, or if I'm going to play, some games or close to, or even more than I did last year when he started 9 games, I want to be compensated for that playtime. The surprising thing to me was him signing for another year at the rate that he did, just under $100,000 in hard money, with all of the same playtime and performance and bonus incentives in his contract. That was a surprising thing to me, because if you're Powell, I think you got to be sitting there thinking, if I play even decent football and there are just 2 quarterback openings in the league, which could be a possibility, that's all it takes is two bidders, that you could get much more than you signed on this deal. But I talked to Powell for about 10 minutes after practice and got a real sense for how focused he is. I don't think he's focused on the money. I think he's focused on proving Scott Milanovic and that Tiger Cats front office right about the decision they made to bring him in, and not only just bring him in, but invest the time in him to be a starter last year and put him on the field for 9 of those games. He dressed for 16, but started for 9, had a 4-5 win-loss record, and looked pretty good, a guy with some upside. But he wants to make sure that their investment from a time perspective and a commitment perspective is rewarded. I think he could be a great young rising quarterback prospect, but he's got a long road to go here. I asked Scott Milanovic where he was on the Trevor Harris or Zach Collaros time track, so to speak, because for the uninitiated, Milanovic had those 2 guys way back in Toronto. I think I want to say in 2012 they were there with Ricky Ray when Milanovic won a Grey Cup there, and he didn't want to put that kind of pressure on him, and respectfully, I will respect that answer. But when you're talking about Milanovic, you got to remember those are the kind of quarterbacks that he has developed. He's worked with Anthony Calvillo in the past as well. So I think that Powell is definitely a quarterback that people need to keep an eye on. And if Bo Levi Mitchell is telling you he can be an amazing quarterback, then I think we got to take Bo Levi Mitchell at his word, because he just doesn't say that about anyone.
Agreed. I was also shocked that Powell signed through 2025 for not a significant pay bump. But if I'm his agent, if in fact Powell does become the face of the franchise this year, then you have leverage saying, hey, we're not going into 2025 under our current deal. So there might still be some leverage here for Powell if he wants to use it post 2024.
The Edmonton Elks lost $3.9 million in 2023, Hodge, the team's 5th straight year with a budget deficit. Is there reason for local fans to panic?
I mean, the answer would be yes, if this team wasn't in a position where a qualified private owner wasn't willing to step up. The good news for local fans is my sources at Edmonton have led me to believe that they are very pleased with the options that are available to them, and that a sale of this team is not going to wait. The best situation, I'm told, in Edmonton that they would have expected was to sell this offseason. Obviously, that didn't happen. Part of the reason why is because so many parties were interested. They signed 20 NDAs. Now, some of those parties have stepped back, but even if half of them are still actively bidding, that means that there is a lot of leverage here for the team, considering how many people want to own a club that, though they've fallen on hard times on and off the field the last 2 years, is still honestly one of the most storied franchises in Canadian professional sports, not even just the CFL, but in all of professional sports in Canada. So I think that's very positive. I don't believe the board is currently hearing bids, but I know they expect to in the next little bit. And the bidding process will be working both ways. So in other words, when bids are made, the team will be able to go to bidders and say, hey, we really liked this, but we didn't like this in your bid. Can you change this? Can you change that? And so that process, depending on how many bidders continue to follow through, can hold things up. But I'm told the goal is to sell this team as soon as possible. Like, this team could sell mid-season, just like the BC Lions sold mid-season a few years ago to Amar Doman, a transaction that I think has worked out wonderfully for all parties. So the Elks, I think, are optimistic they're going to find the right owner. I think that at the end of the day, this is a necessary move given the current financial realities of the club. Something that I did find interesting, and I guess you could label it disappointing as well. Looking through the team's financial records, the team's attendance actually improved by 4% from 2022 to 2023. The issue is that their gate revenue actually dropped by 20%, which tells you that they have been giving away a ton of free tickets. Now, part of that could be the free ticket initiative or the guaranteed win ticket initiative that started last season. But obviously the fact that the numbers on paper improved somewhat from 2022 to 2023 does not mean that Edmontonians are opening their wallets to buy tickets to this club. A lot of that was comped. And so clearly they have yet to stem the bleeding, at least in that regard. They need Edmontonians to step up. And I think the club is hopeful that the right owner can help kind of trigger that, because a lot of people, between the literal North American professional sports record that they set for home losses, and between, I think, some of the off-field things, I think there's still a contingent in that city that's turned off by the name change, which from what I understand is not up for debate. The name is not changing back, if anyone's curious. I mean, I suppose a private owner can do whatever they want, but I know that the team currently has no appetite to change the name back. I think the future here can be bright. It's just a matter of finding the perfect person or organization to pass the baton to.
There's a huge stadium there. So the fact that, they were still giving away tickets, but couldn't generate, even the revenue that they generated the year before, makes you wonder about where this team is going. And it also shows you the reason why the board wants to sell to a private owner. I hope that it's a strong local owner that's passionate about this team, because we've seen how well that's worked out in BC, as you mentioned, and with Pierre-Karl Pelledo in Montreal as well. And in some of the other markets, Bob Young in Hamilton would be another one of those who's very passionate about the Tiger Cats. So I hope that that is the end result of this, whoever ends up owning the franchise. And, Hodge, I like the way that you phrased it, that they want to sell it as soon as possible, but they're going to go through this in a diligent way. And just because there might be some timelines that get thrown out, I hope that nothing is rushed, and the right situation, the right owner, and the right way forward is found here for the Edmonton Elks, because it's a better league when these franchises are on the most stable foundation possible. And I think right now, outside of Edmonton, all the rest of the franchises are fairly healthy and arguably in the best spot in league history from a ownership perspective, however they're owned, individually or otherwise. So I would really like to see a great resolution here for Edmonton and the pride of that team from its storied past restored in what used to be known as the City of Champions.
Well, and funnily enough, I mean, I know there's been some hand-wringing about where the Elks are right now. 10 years ago, everybody was panicking about Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver. It was like, oh my God, like these big market, like everyone else is doing great, but these big markets, we just can't get them going. And obviously the Toronto Argonauts have taken steps back this offseason, but it was extremely cool seeing 26,000 people there for the East Final and the Argos really being supported in that city. And I think the ownership of Amar Doman has been incredible out west. And I also think that Pierre-Karl Pelledo, especially if those Grey Cup rings, oh my goodness, we're going to talk about those in a second, but man, this guy is putting money into this team. I think those clubs, right, have done amazing. And as much as some people want to be negative about the situation in Edmonton, which I think is fully warranted, I also think, by the way, the negativity in Calgary is warranted. That club has struggled the last few years. Jay McNeil, their new president, has been very open about their losses in terms of season ticket holders and the challenges surrounding their stadium. So it's unfortunate that the two teams in Alberta are, I don't know if I'd say in free fall, but struggling, certainly relative to where they were 10 years ago. But there is recent precedent for these other markets having a renaissance. So I think that my point is if Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver can turn things around, obviously they can turn around in places like Calgary and Edmonton, places where the CFL has a very strong tradition. And I think that there are a ton of fans. They just need to be maybe welcomed back into the building a little bit, and they need to be given a reason to go to a facility that isn't substandard, which is more the case in Calgary, or in the case of Edmonton. They just need a team who can win at least occasionally, right? Because the whatever it was, 23 straight home losses. I mean, heck, if I was a season ticket holder, I would have given up my tickets. 23 straight loss. Like that is great. Like I grew up in Winnipeg during a time where the Blue Bombers sucked on a pretty regular basis. I don't think I ever went more than 8 games without a win. 22? 23? That's crazy. Anyway.
Man, that Alberta economy is booming too. People are moving out there. The real estate market is flush. I don't think there's a reason why these teams, Calgary and we're focused on Edmonton in this instance, can't attract new fans into the building, but it definitely needs a jolt of new energy. And I really hope that this private ownership can do that for the Elks.
It's now time for Hodge's heritage moment. On this day in 2006, Doug Flutie announced his retirement from professional football. The Boston College product played 8 seasons in the CFL and was named the league's most outstanding player a record 6 times, passing for 41,355 yards and 270 touchdowns. The 1984 Heisman Trophy winner's career was bookended by stints in the NFL, including a Pro Bowl selection with the Buffalo Bills in 1998. Though it remains a subject of debate, Flutie is widely considered the greatest player in CFL history. Dunk, do you agree that Flutie is the CFL's GOAT?
I do, but there's a lot of recency bias there, and Doug Flutie was really the main reason why I fell in love with watching this league when he was with the Toronto Argonauts in 1996, 1997, just dominating, winning back-to-back Grey Cups and running around like a little superhero. Man, I can remember, I don't know what year it was, but I was playing Guelph minor football. We went down to the Sky Dome at the time, and we got the chance to see Doug Flutie before the game, and he had like this crop top on, and you could see his 6-pack and his muscles were just bulging at the time. I was like, man, this guy is surreal. Like, it wasn't real life to be able to see this guy, especially how small he was, and the fact that he could go out on the field and make, these giants look silly with some of the moves he had while he was scrambling or running the football, and the way he threw the football was just unbelievable. So I am biased for that reason, but I do believe that he is the best player in CFL history.
I fully agree, and I honestly don't think there's much of a debate. I think there are people who did it for longer than Doug Flutie, but I don't think there's anybody who dominated their era to the same extent as Doug Flutie. Like, this man won MOP 6 times, and he got hurt one of the 2 years he didn't win it. Like, he could have won 7. And when we talk about guys who have dominated their eras, or maybe not dominated their eras, but had a tremendous amount of success, right? You're talking about, and I'm just going to use the quarterback position as an example, guys like Zach Collaros, 2 MOPs, Bo Levi Mitchell, 2 MOPs, Mike O'Reilly, 1 MOP. And then you look back right at the old days, guys who were great players in the 70s, the 80s, whatever. Warren Moon, 1 MOP, right? Like, to win 6 is unbelievable. And I think, when you look at a guy like Mike Pringle, incredible career, but George Reed did a lot of what Mike Pringle did and vice versa. For me, there is no precedent for somebody in a not quite a decade-long span, but still not a short span of time. We're talking 8 years in the CFL. There is no precedent for somebody dominating the competition to the extent to which Doug Flutie did. Anthony Calvillo did it for a lot longer, but again, I think Anthony won 3 MLPs. Doug Flutie won 6 in 8 years. 6! He won it 75% of the time he was in the league. That is insane. It is actually insane. So to be Doug Flutie is the GOAT, and barring a shocking turn of events, will always be the GOAT in my view. Anyways, it's time for the 3-minute drill.
Just a note, send your hate mail to @John D. Hodge on Twitter and also @JDunk12 if you think it's somebody else.
If you're wrong and you want to say it's somebody else, feel free to message us. That's correct.
Yeah, let us know. Keep us balanced. Former first overall CFL draft pick Jordan Williams retired at age 29 after being traded to the Hamilton Tiger Cats this offseason. Is that a big blow for the Tabbies? It
is. It really is. This is a guy who I believe the Ticats were certainly counting on, so not only be a starter, but be a Canadian starter, right? Somebody who was going to fill one of those ratio spots. You look at Hamilton's roster as it stands now, they're going to be in a bit of trouble, I think, finding their 7th Canadian starter post this retirement, and that's without any injuries. So I'm not saying they should be pressing the panic button, but they should be pressing the concerned button, if you will. The CFL has added on-demand playback and AirPlay compatibility to their free preseason streaming. Will you take advantage of that service?
Of course, man. I think it's great, and especially, that one preseason day where there's all these games going on at one time. You got to be able to go back and check them out. I would like to say we had an emailer, Hodge, all the way from the other side of the world. Let me just pull this up real quick because I want to get this out there. Grant J. Venables, who's in Southeast Asia, Malaysia and Thailand to be specific. And he said that he cannot get access to CFL Plus.
Oh, interesting.
Overseas. So that is a challenge to the head office there to get this product out there, man. You want to talk about Global 2.0? People overseas can't even watch your product. So please figure out and respond to the note that Grant sent to the league office that did not elicit a response yet, and have it available for people to watch around this globe. Canadian defensive tackle Ted Laurent has officially retired following 12 seasons in the CFL. The 37-year-old played 187 career games with Edmonton and Hamilton, recording 235 total tackles, 53 sacks, 25 tackles for loss, 9 forced fumbles with 4 fumble recoveries. He earned 5 division all-star selections and was a CFL all-star on 2 occasions. How will you remember Big Teddy?
Well, Big Teddy, I'll remember him as a dominant player on the interior, right? He did not do a lot of sexy things that some defensive linemen get to do, coming off the edge, rushing the passer. He was a true, I know he played some 3-tech, but, a true nose tackle in the sense that he was there to absorb double teams. And yes, he could sometimes beat those double teams, get to the passer, make the play, but he was somebody who opposing offenses had to know where he was at all times and account for him in their blocking scheme. Again, often with more than just one player. So credit to Laurent on an outstanding career. Staying in Steeltown, the Tiger Cats have cut receiver Terry Godwin, who put up almost 1,000 yards with the club last season. Is that a major loss?
It could be if they don't find somebody to step up in his place. And that release was somewhat intriguing because the Tiger Cats paid him a $5,000 signing bonus to re-sign. When I was at practice, I did see, multiple players getting a shot at that spot to replace him. They're clearly going to go younger and bigger. And I thought the most intriguing thing, I sound like JC in the 3-minute drill here, Hodge, but that Scott Milanovich said is in this league where you can't cut block on the outside anymore, essentially where these small guys can't go low on bigger DBs, that he wants some more physical receivers in his receiving group because of that rule change. I thought that was interesting and something that we should monitor when some of these roster evaluations are made going into the regular season. The Montreal Alouettes got their Grey Cup rings this past week. Did you see those things, man? They look pretty slick.
Yeah, Cheese thinks it's called the 3-minute drill because he gets to talk for 3 minutes every time he gets asked a question. Short answer, yes. They looked incredible. Kudos to the Owls. 6-time CFL All-Star Armando Sewell has returned as a guest coach in training camp with the Edmonton Elks, where he spent, of course, most of his career. Do you think he could teach those D linemen a thing or two?
Oh, I think he definitely can, man. He's been around this league a time or two, and that will be a interesting story to watch if he wants to continue his coaching career. University of Manitoba Bison's quarterback Jackson Tuchinski led Team West to a victory in the annual U Sports East-West Bowl. Do you think he could play in the CFL someday?
I do. I think that he needs to get more decisive with the football, go through his reads a little bit quicker. But I have now seen him start a full season for the Bisons. His athleticism is tremendous. I do think that he could be a legitimate CFL player in the future. New York Giants head coach Brian Daboll cited Nathan Rourke's performance in the CFL as one of the reasons the team put in a waiver claim following the Canadian quarterback's release from New England. Does that bode well for his NFL chances?
I think it does. I mean, I would like to see these NFL coaches, when Bill Belichick was in New England, he said about like one word about Nathan Rourke, sort of expand a little bit as to why they made the moves that they did. The Patriots and the Giants both claimed Rourke off waivers, but I do think that Rourke is in a great situation to compete to earn a roster spot in NYC. The Edmonton Elks and Winnipeg Blue Bombers released former first-round picks this past week, Cole Nelson and Anthony Bennett, respectively. Are those two now considered busts, Hodge?
No, because I think both players are dealing with injuries right now, and that's something that fans need to keep in mind is, especially with Wednesday, a lot of player cuts happening across the country as teams get their rosters down to 75 players plus non-counters, is a lot of the guys getting cut are just hurt. Now, some of them will never be brought back, but some of them will. And I think in this case, Nelson and Bennett could both eventually end up back with the Elks and Bombers, respectively. The Tiger Cats cut tight end Thaddeus Moss, who is also the son of Pro Football Hall of Fame receiver Randy Moss. Dunk, are you disappointed we're never going to see him on the field?
No, I'm not disappointed we won't see him on the field. I'm disappointed that this means that there's probably a much smaller to no chance that Randy Moss ever comes up to Canada and watches a CFL game live in person. A number of 2024 CFL draft picks signed rookie contracts following appearances in NFL rookie minicamps, including Nick Marner in Ottawa, Ben LaBrosse in Calgary, and Jeffrey Canton-Arcou in Montreal. Which first-year Canadian will have the biggest impact this season?
The one who I think has the best opportunity to make a major impact is Nick Marner in Ottawa, the second overall pick in this year's draft, who reported to the team, practiced at least somewhat on Tuesday. He is somebody at 6'6", 205 pounds, moves well. He, I think, has the potential to start day one for that team, certainly at field side wideout. I know that Bob Dice has said lots of positive things about guys like Keaton Brueggeling, Daniel Oladejo, who they've drafted and developed. But Marner's size is different, and Drew Brown, I think, has the talent under center to use all of the weapons in his arsenal. Quantez Stiggers signed his rookie contract with the New York Jets. What are your expectations for his rookie season in the Big Apple?
I think he'll do, similar to what he did in the CFL in terms of surprising with his production level with the Jets. There's a reason that they invested the draft capital in selecting Stiggers, and he's been a guy along this miraculous story that he's had, which went through the Toronto Argonauts and winning the CFL's Most Outstanding Rookie Award, that he can outperform expectations. So I'm very curious to see if he can get in on defense, how many snaps he can get in that. And we definitely know that he's able to get his hands on the football as well. So we got to keep an eye on Stiggers in the Big Apple. Former first overall pick Dante Bull had to be helped off the field near the end of Ottawa Red Blacks practice on Monday and underwent an MRI on Tuesday. What does that say about the potential for him this season?
Well, I think Bull's in a situation where he needs to take a big step from year one to year two. Last year, he was coming off a broken leg he suffered during his final collegiate season at Fresno State. He did eventually make 7 starts at right tackle, but I think the club is really hopeful that he can grab that job by the reins and really win it. this does not bode well for those chances. Hopefully the injury, whatever it is not serious. Last one. Trevor Harris is thrilled to be back with the Riders after fearing the tibial plateau injury he suffered last year could have ended his career. Are you surprised he fought his way all the way back?
I'm not at all, knowing how diligent he is with his nutrition and the way that he prepares his body for a season. But he did admit, that mentally it was very difficult on him at times, and full credit to him for getting back into it, Hodge. I think it's a reminder that when an athlete, and in this case in the CFL, these players suffer injuries, that there's no guarantee that they get back, and that there's a process that goes on behind the scenes, in the dark, in these training rooms where oftentimes it's just them doing it on their own. Yes, there's trainers and stuff around, but from their perspective of pushing through it, that it's not just a shoo-in that they're going to come back from these injuries. And full credit to Harris for opening up and speaking about the uncertainty that was going through his mind, the fact that he worked with a mental coach to help get back to this. And I hope that he can show that even in his late 30s, after having suffered this injury, that he can still play quarterback at a high level.
Well said. I also thought it was very interesting. Jalen Philpott made similar comments. Of course, he missed all of last season due to an injury. He's now back with the Calgary Stampeders. I think could have a big season for them in that receiving core. Yes, the mental side is tough. I've also talked to football players whose, backs are so bad they need help from their wives to get off the toilet in the morning, which is not dignified, but you can imagine the anxiety of, I literally can't get off the toilet in the bathroom. It's Tuesday morning. Friday night, I have to go block Charleston Hughes. Like, that is the situation some of these guys are in when their bodies, especially at the end of their career, start to break down. So I do think sometimes in the media, we jump over players who are playing poorly, near the end of their career. Sometimes we don't have the full picture, and it's important to keep that in mind. So kudos to Harris for sharing his story. And if you didn't read those comments, please be sure to do so in our article up at 3downnation.com. We thank you as always for listening. Cheese will be back next week.
Cheese.